Companies are a lot of times creating the very sales problems that they're trying to solve. And the non-supportive beliefs which create those mindsets that we're talking about, that will infect your team at a rate of 355%, which prevents them from asking tough questions, building trust, getting to economic decision makers, all the things that you need in your forecast in order to actually survive.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Hi, I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Industrial growth covers such a wide range of topics, from M&A and strategy through marketing automation software and everything in between. And today we're really going to dig into sales and sales training. My guest today is Carole Mahoney. Carole is a speaker, an author, a business coach, a sales trainer. She spent really the first half of her career in marketing, including founding and running her own agency. And then she pivoted from marketing to sales. We're going to, I'm sure, talk about that and talk about some of the lessons she learned along the way and what prompted that pivot. Today, her company is Unbound Growth. And she works with solopreneurs and sales teams on building sales effectiveness. She's been called the sales therapist at HBS, where she's an entrepreneurial sales coach, and been named a top sales influencer by LinkedIn and Sales Hacker. She works from deep in the North Woods up in Maine and kind of brings a Yankee pragmatism that infuses a lot of her work and thinking. So I know we're in for a really interesting conversation today. So thanks for taking the time to visit today, Carole.
Thanks so much for having me, Ed. You and I have had several conversations before, so this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So let's start first by getting to know a little bit about Carole, because your personal story and your background is so important, I think, as context for everything that we're going to talk about.
Okay. So personal background, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. Like, it was the idea of a 9-to-5 job was a bit of a foreign concept in my family. My sister and I were among the first to take that 9-to-5 job and go to college and so forth. And I always had the heart of an entrepreneur. And so even when I was in college, I was writing a business plan for the business that I wanted to start in 5 years. I was testing it out.
What was that business going to be?
It was going to be small business consulting. And I really didn't know as to what facility it was going to be, but I had seen all of the struggles that my grandparents and parents had gone through in trying to grow their small businesses to put food on the table. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way other than the trial and the hit and miss. And so I really wanted to go to school to understand marketing and how do I help them to actually grow their businesses? Because when I went to school, sales wasn't offered as an elective. And even if it were, I don't think I would have taken it. Because when my college advisor said that I should consider some roles in sales because I'd be a great salesperson, I made this don't call me that face. And I thought marketing was the answer for it all. And this was also the dawn of, SEO and the internet, and internet marketing was just starting to become a thing. And I thought, I'm going to do such awesome internet marketing. We're not going to need salespeople, the pushy, slimy sleaziness of it. Everyone's going to be able to buy online, and we're going to eliminate the need for sales.
That was such a seductive idea at that time, wasn't it?
It really was. And I was fully bought in, had the Kool-Aid, was just all in. And after I graduated college, I, also graduated from the startup that I was working in at the time that was doing all of these great, cool tech tools. But in my mind, I had this plan. And part of that plan was working at a larger corporation so that I could understand how they worked and, gain some additional experience and some additional contacts. This was in 2007. Guess what happened at the end of 2007?
Things got ugly in a hurry.
It got ugly in a real hurry. And so I had been at this large corporation finance company for 6 months and had done, a lot of stuff with them, had generated more leads and opportunities in their pipeline and then in their entire company history using online marketing. And I thought, I'm on my way to my big promotion, walk into my boss's office, and she says, yeah, we're going to have to let you go. Thank you so much for everything that you've done.
Wow.
And I was I was a little burned, more than a little burned. I was angry. I wanted revenge. And I figured out on my way home that my best revenge is going to start a business and be wildly successful. And that's going to show up. Yeah. 6 months later, I was standing at the grocery store line, figuring out how am I going to pay for groceries that I can't afford anymore. And that's when I realized I was going to need to learn how to do sales. And I tried all of the things, like, you can see these books behind me if you're watching the video later. I've tried every book that there was out there, from referral selling and Sandler selling and baseline selling, strategic selling, question-based selling, like you name it. I tried it. If sales books and programs were weight loss programs, then I was the Oprah Winfrey of sales. And it wasn't clicking. It wasn't sticking. And I didn't understand why. And, I had managed to get some clients in through a few of the things that I had tried, but I didn't really understand how it worked or what was going on. I was just hustling and grinding and networking and reaching out to people and, kind of burning myself out and trying to grow this agency and this business. It got it to a level where I was able to hire a couple of employees. And then the thing that I started to see happen was that as I was working with clients, I was losing clients almost as quickly as I could bring them in, because what was happening is that even though we were delivering a ton of leads for them, they weren't able to close them. Their salespeople were now struggling in the same way that I was struggling to close deals, because they were using the same tactics that they were using before the internet to try and sell with buyers.
Well, I'd say if they were at least following up on the lead you were bringing in, that's better than many of the companies I see where they bring in the leads and nobody even calls them.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what was happening. Nobody was calling them because the salespeople were too busy either making outbound calls or doing whatever it was that they were doing. This idea of using inbound leads or internet leads to them was like, if they don't have a credit card and ready to buy, I'm not going to bother to call them.
Right.
And unfortunately, what then happened is that all of my clients said, well, we can't afford to keep paying for your services because we're not getting any sales from it because the salespeople aren't following up on them to close them. And so then I was kind of found myself in that same position that I was in when I first started my business, where I had to let my employees go and I had to understand and figure out what's going to be next for me, because I was burned out on the marketing side of things. Like, I was tired of trying to work with sales teams that didn't want to listen, that didn't want to learn. And I was doing work like, trying to do some sales and marketing alignment work because I saw that this was, part of the issues that we had. But nobody in sales wanted to listen to someone from marketing.
Right.
And so because I was in that box, I started to see that I was going to need to make some radical changes because my mission was to help small businesses to grow. Like, growing up in my family of entrepreneurs, I saw not only the struggle, but I also saw the potential and the impact that small business owners can have. And you look at the stats about our economy, it relies on small businesses for both innovation and job growth. And so this is where the rubber really met the road for me. And if my mission was to help them grow and marketing wasn't the answer, I needed to do something radically different. So I hired a sales coach for myself because I needed to change the way I thought about sales and how I approached sales if I was ever going to have a hope of helping someone else do it. And in that process, by changing my beliefs about sales, my perspectives about sales, it started to change the way that I behaved. And that started to change the way my buyers behaved with me. And that was an aha moment for me right there.
So let me interrupt you there. And I love your quote, build your bravery. I think you use that in a variety of places. And I know you have it in your book.
Yeah.
My understanding of your journey that you just recapped for us, and that I know from knowing you for some years, is that it's really about changing mindset. And you speak very frankly about some of your personal habits and losing weight, in addition to this parallel experience of marketing and sales. So if mindset and self-limiting beliefs are really core to the struggles that many people have with sales, how do you approach that? Give me some examples of self-limiting mindsets and what you do to overcome them.
Yeah. The most common self-limiting mindset that I hear from people is, I think people need to like me in order to buy from me. And it's something that is perpetuated throughout our sales industry and everything else. That we're told, you people don't like you, they're not going to trust you, they're not going to want to buy from you. And there's a tiny kernel of truth to that, in that you can't be a jerk, because then the message is never going to reach the person, because all they can see is the jerk in front of them. But that's where it stops. Like, you can't rely on your likability to be able to get you through a sales process. Because what happens is that when you're so concerned about people liking you, you won't ask the tough questions of them. And
That's why Yankees like us can actually do business in other parts of the country that are more polite, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny you say that because I was just in the South for the last 2 weeks. And one of the things that everyone had said to me, they're like, are you sure you're from the North? Because you're much more friendly than anyone we've ever met from the North. But it's absolutely true is that, in order for people to build trust with you, and that's what's necessary in sales for people to buy from you, not only do you have to not be a jerk, but you also have to be able and willing to challenge their thinking so that they can think of their problem or solution in a different way. Ask them the tough questions that get them to say, you know what, I hadn't thought of it that way before. No one's ever asked me that before. And that's what actually builds trust with your buyers. And so this self-limiting belief that people need to like me to buy from me creates this mindset that we call a need for approval, which prevents us from asking those tough questions that build trust. And
also leads salespeople to do stupid stuff like just vomit up quotes because somebody reflexively asks for one rather than saying, okay, I'm happy to help you with that when the time is right. But what are we even quoting? Let's back up and understand what's going on. Many people are afraid to say that.
Yeah. Well, and the other place where I see it happen and is where it's the most detrimental is when we need to get to and talk to the ultimate economic decision makers. There's data from an analysis of like 9,000 calls that shows that when we don't have a decision maker involved in a deal, it's 80% less likely to close.
Wow.
But for enterprise deals, it's 233% less likely to close.
Wow.
And so this need for approval, this need for people to like us or to see us in a certain way is what's getting in the way of getting to decision makers, building trust. And in sales, that's a death sentence. Right. And you mentioned that I do coaching at Harvard Business School. And the first year that we did that, I realized how powerful this was when I watched those students' first video role plays. And when they didn't ask questions and they went right into the pitch. And I gave them some pushback about it later. And they said to me, well, isn't that what a salesperson is supposed to do? Control the call, make the pitch, and ask for the business. It was their beliefs and mindsets about what sales was that caused.
We call them students, but these are mature business people. They're going to be leaders of enterprise.
These are the smartest business minds in the world right now that have this perception of sales. So it's not about how smart you are. It's about the belief system that you have towards the behavior you need to execute on that causes certain behaviors in buyers that will determine your success.
But I see in so many companies, they complain because their salespeople aren't being successful getting to decision makers. They're having a hard time doing outbound sales. But then you get them together in a conference room and they talk trash. Somebody says, oh, so-and-so is on the phone to speak to you. Well, who's that? I don't know. Well, they're a sales rep with, I don't have time for that. And they talk trash about salespeople. So what do they think their own salespeople are going to think when they hear that's the way their management considers salespeople?
Exactly. There's so much wrapped up in that. One of the things that I'm really starting to pound the pavement on is that companies are a lot of times creating the very sales problems that they're trying to solve. And that's just one example.
And I know you also talk about how mindsets, positive and or negative, are contagious.
Yes.
And so just like the fish rots from the head, if the owners or leaders or sales managers have negative sales mindsets, either self-limiting beliefs or negative impressions of salespeople, then that ends up reflected in their team.
At a rate of 355% more likely for them to adopt negative beliefs.
Wow.
But the other side of that, and this is from an analysis that I did of objective management group's data, and I took a subset of that, and I wanted to, we've heard that phrase, as goes the manager, so goes the team, and we can observe it, but I wanted to really dig in and understand which specific beliefs and mindsets impact the team the most. And the non-supportive beliefs, which create those mindsets that we're talking about, with negatives or non-supportive beliefs, that will infect your team at a rate of 355%. Which prevents them from asking tough questions, building trust, getting to economic decision makers, all the things that you need in your forecast in order to actually survive.
Right.
But the other side of this is that the managers who had supportive beliefs were 1,000% more likely to pass that on to their teams. Unfortunately, only 7% of managers actually had those supportive beliefs out of 500,000 that we evaluated.
Wow. So we're talking about second standard deviation talent in order to have the qualities that you need. But that raises an interesting point. Is an empowering mindset simply the absence of a self-limiting mindset, or is there actually an inverse analog that's more than just neutral?
There is an inverse analog to it. So if you think about, I used to smoke in high school. I was a chain smoker. And in order for me to quit smoking, I couldn't just stop. right? Like going cold turkey, I can't even tell you how many times I tried to do that. And that's when I realized in order for me to replace this bad behavior, I need to replace it with something good, because just trying to exert willpower over it isn't going to work. And so it's not enough to just recognize the belief. It's not enough to try to eliminate it. In order to truly replace it, you have to put a positive belief system in place for that. And so for me, I replaced cigarettes with black coffee. Now at 49 years old, I've managed to get rid of that bad habit as well. And that's the thing of it, is that there is a whole cognitive process in order to replace our belief systems. And that's one of the struggles that I see, and why I wrote that into the book was we talk so much about the importance of mindsets and beliefs and how strong and positive beliefs are important. We've had Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. We've had all types of books by, Simon Sinek and everyone else. But the thing it doesn't tell us is how do we actually change those for ourselves? Mm-hmm. And that was the piece that I really wanted to dig into, because I knew from my own experience and from digging into the research that we don't change our beliefs and our habits by simple willpower, which is a limited resource, but by replacing it with something that's going to reinforce the positive side of things and building those behavioral habits. Really, it's about building habits for ourselves.
Right. So you talked about this idea of inbound marketing and how you were so excited because it was going to obviate the need for sales.
Yeah.
Everybody would be able to buy on their own, and you were generating a lot of leads, but it wasn't leading to revenue. So I gather that your position is that idea didn't age well, or at least it needed to be adjusted. At the same time, we see in the tech space, companies have now adopted what they call product-led growth, which basically is we're just going to let the product sell itself. We're going to market. We're going to have success people to help onboard, but we're not really going to invest too much in sales. What's your reaction? How do you reconcile that with your experience?
Well, it depends on what it is that you are providing as a solution. So product-led growth works great for organizations like Dropbox, for example, where for the most part, it is somewhat of a B2C kind of a transactional thing. Like it's not complicated. This is a tool where you can store your stuff. And everything can be self-serviced. It's a simple solution. Whereas when you start getting into more complex solutions, when you start getting into industrial manufacturing, where there's, a lot of different moving parts to this and a lot of things that it impacts, and it's a complicated process, product-led growth is not going to work for you. And so it really, deciding on the model that you're going to use for revenue growth in your organization depends on who your buyer is and what the solution that you offer and how complicated that is. So if you have a simple solution like Dropbox, you don't need to have a complicated sales team. Now, I'm sure that Dropbox has also within their organization an enterprise sales team that's selling to larger organizations. That's not going to be, you're not going to spend $250,000 on a website without having a human being involved.
What's interesting, though, is this contrast that I see, particularly on LinkedIn, where there's a lot of marketing and salespeople, and they say, this is how we do it. This is what works. This is the answer. This is the solution. Mm-hmm. And I spend a lot of time in the traditional industrial manufacturing space, where I hear with equal frequency, that's not the way our business works. That's not how our industry operates. That's not how our buyers think. And so there's this continuum of really mutually exclusive binary positions, and the reality lays somewhere in the middle. What do you find? I mean, you work across industries. How do you see those two kind of coexisting? For
me, the filter for everything is who your buyer is. Like, for example, when I was at my last semester in Harvard, one of the students, they get these complicated case studies for these, complex sales and things like that. And as a coach, I also get the same thing. So I see the materials that the students are getting. And one of the students, had stumbled through something. And so I referenced back to the case study, the importance of it. And he said to me, how do you do that? How are you able to pull insights from complicated information so quickly? And my immediate answer was, well, I simply use the filter of my buyer's perspective to understand what's going to be most important. And so that's how I would also invite other organizations to decide what is your go-to market motion going to look like. It needs to be based on how your buyers look at this problem, how they make their decisions, and then how they go about doing that. Right. And if you're not doing that, then you're really just setting yourself up for failure, because what often happens in sales organizations and businesses, we're so focused on us, our product, our process, our systems.
You think?
And then you push that out to our buyers thinking that they're going to jump on board, and they're like, yeah, I don't care.
Right.
And so we need to be able to, instead of developing our systems and our processes from the inside out, where we take our internal systems and try to push them out onto our buyers, we need to actually take the reverse and go from the outside in. And
You mean when you get
determine
an
that.
initial discovery call, you shouldn't go in with a 17-page deck about us and how we started 75 years ago and have a 50,000 square foot manufacturing facility?
No, please no, just stop.
There's a lot of
Nobody
people
cares. They don't
they
care.
wouldn't know what to do if they couldn't do that, though.
I know. And that's exactly the problem that we see in sales training and sales coaching today. And this is, we said earlier that companies call us the problems that they try to solve for. It starts with how they hire and onboard their salespeople,
Right.
because it starts with all about our systems, our processes, our product. And then somewhere at the end, they tag out, oh yeah, by the way, this is the buyer you're going to sell to.
Right.
And that's what's setting up the pitch snaps, the checklist. This is all about us, because that's how they're onboarded and trained and hired. And so it's not the seller's necessarily fault, because this is how they were fed. And so what you teach to your salespeople is what they're going to preach to their buyers. And so if you want to start to change this dynamic, you need to change the way you hire and onboard and train your sellers and managers and leaders to put the buyers first in all of this. It suddenly simplifies a lot of things and also makes things a little bit more predictable as well, because you're not trying to force your buyers into this process that they're not aligned with. Instead, you're aligning your process with their buying journey so that you can have more predictable milestone-based steps in your process that tell you where you are exactly with your buyer and what's going to be next likely to happen. And if not, we take it out of the pipeline. Now we have more accurate forecasts.
Yeah, particularly in a world where buyers are 70% of the way through their buying journey before they want to talk to a rep. Gartner has a great graphic, Bob Apollo has shared frequently, that talks about the long slog that shows the buying journey just being a convoluted, contradictory.
It's not linear or simple in any way, right?
Yeah, it's completely chaotic.
It's like if you've ever watched a sheet map about how somebody navigates inside of a web page, they are all over the place. They're like a monkey that's high on crack or something. Like there's no linear logic to any of it, and that's
you realize how ineffective your nav is when you watch those recordings.
Yeah, exactly. But that's exactly how sales processes work. We have This is our step, this is our next step, and then this is our next step. But we don't understand our why. Our buyers aren't following our steps.
Right.
Because our steps don't align with theirs.
Marketing and sales absolutely have to collaborate. They talk about alignment. I believe integration is more important. But backing up, sometimes there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what each is responsible for. And David Meerman Scott had an interesting blog post, I think it was yesterday, where he defined and contrasted sales and marketing. And he did it in a pretty simple way. What he wrote was, marketing communicates with the many people who make up a buyer persona. Salespeople, on the other hand, communicate with one potential customer at a time, putting the buying process into context. That struck me as pretty sensible. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And something I've been saying from the beginning, it's kind of like the difference between training and coaching. Training is one to many. Coaching is one-to-one. And that's the same thing with sales and marketing. In a ideal world where you have sales and marketing integration, the one-to-one conversations are informing the one-to-many conversations.
And vice
versa.
versa.
That only works if you have a good salesperson who has supportive beliefs and skills to be able to extract that information from buyers instead of, well, they're not buying because they went to the competition because we're too expensive.
And then it works the other way too. I mean, sales enablement is a great example where the one-to-many inform the one-to-one using tools that can advance the sales process and the buying journey.
Yeah.
So here's a trick question. What's most important for an industrial manufacturing company, sales or marketing?
Sales.
Okay. Defend that.
Well, I mean, you can't take marketing leads to the bank. Like if you could cash in on marketing leads, we'd all be rich. It takes a sales conversation in order for an actual purchase to happen. And unless you're selling, pens that you can do a product-led growth and just sell them online, you're going to need a person to have a conversation with another person. And there's no amount of marketing collateral that's going to be able to do that for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd explain a little bit differently. I think if you only did marketing, you'd sell some occasionally. If you only did sales, you'd sell more. Now, you do them both together in the right ratio with the right tools, then you're really optimizing for effectiveness. But if you could only do one, if you only did one, it's got to be sales, because that's the way to drive those conversations.
Well, and it comes down to customer acquisition costs. And a totally sales motion is going to have a higher customer acquisition cost than when, like you said, you have the right combination of sales and marketing. Ideally, marketing marketing is about demand generation, but that also lowers that customer acquisition cost. And sales is the thing that helps you to increase the customer lifetime value. So I kind of look at it in terms of marketing is to lower customer acquisition costs, whereas sales is to increase customer lifetime value.
All right. So you're mentioning some important KPIs. If I'm in an industrial company that has a CRM, doesn't use it well, hasn't built dashboards, doesn't track a number of those things, and you were to give me a list of, say, 5 KPIs that would really help me understand this revenue growth continuum from pre-awareness through reorder, what would those KPIs be?
All right. So for pre-awareness, I would look at not email opens or email list size, but I would look at actual click-through rates of what people are actually clicking on. And so like the engagement metrics, not the open metrics or the traffic or anything like that. I would look at the engagement metrics as to what people are engaging on.
So time on page, bounce rate, those kinds of things?
Not even time on, well, yes, time on page, but I would be looking for click-through rate from one page to another.
Okay.
Because you want people to move through some type of a journey on your website. And so I would be looking at the click-through rate from one page to another. And that's where you're really going to start to see where your marketing is going to be paying off. And then, of course, there's marketing qualified leads, but in sales qualified leads, I pay more attention to sales qualified leads.
But you got to define what that means, right? You
have to define what that means with your salespeople, because they're the ones who actually determine whether it's a sales qualified lead. You can only give them, all right, they've downloaded this, we have this intent data, and so we know and understand that this is likely the case, but sales is the one that decides whether it's a qualified lead or not.
All right, so let me then take that back to something you said earlier, where actually our sales process needs to be a reflection of the buying journey. So sales isn't really deciding. Sales is just translating what the buyers decided, right?
Exactly. It's giving marketing the feedback as to, yes, this is a qualified lead because of these particular things that are happening within the company. We have, the right problem awareness and identification. We have consensus within the organization. Those are the types of things that I would be looking for as far as that handoff between sales and marketing go. Then the other things I would be looking at that are more lagging indicators, like the customer acquisition cost that we talked about, the customer lifetime value, that's kind of more towards the end. Also, retention rates of customers. And so if you have lower, you have a low customer acquisition cost. You also have a low customer lifetime value because you have a high churn rate in your customers. So those are the kinds of lagging metrics that I would look at. But leading indicators that I would look at, these are things that tell you that you're headed towards those things, is I would look at the velocity that's happening throughout your pipeline. So if you have, like a 6-month sales cycle and you start to notice that as you're making these changes, that sales cycle starts to speed up, I would look at how long your sales cycle and how things move through the pipeline. I would also then look at how are our average order rates increasing or are they decreasing? Because that tells you whether or not you're selling on value with your buyers. The other thing that I would look at a leading indicator within your pipeline that is key for forecasting is, do we have other people involved in the deal? Do we have the economic decision maker? Do we have the people that, legal, IT, all of those key sort of stakeholders in the organization involved in this? That's one of the things that I use as a litmus test in my pipelines for my clients is who else do we have involved in this? That typically is what's going to shorten your sales cycle and increase your average order value. And
decrease this dreaded deals lost to no decision, these deals that just kind of evaporate, which for many companies in complex sales is somewhere around 40%.
Yeah, anywhere from 40 to 60% if you believe the research from Ted McKenna and the Jolt effect. The thing that's interesting about that research is that the status quo is not the thing that causes people to make no decision. It's the fear of making the wrong decision. And so, one of the other things that I'm starting to train my clients to do is to look at how are we handling objections? Are we bringing up the objections to lower risk first, or are we reacting to the objections that buyers are giving us and starting to look at how does that impact our close rate in our sales cycle? Because what I encourage people to do is you be the one that brings up possible obstacles and objections and how to handle them so that you can lower that likelihood of no decision due to the fear of making the wrong decision.
And another example of where sales enablement content can be really helpful. Companies in the industrial space, it's amazing. Their content typically consists of data sheets, product brochures, and not what is the CFO going to think about? How does the board evaluate this compared to other capital decisions? What's the operational implication of doing it? How long are we going to disrupt production in order to implement this solution.
Mm-hmm.
All those kinds of things. People worry about them. People think about them, and to pretend they don't exist is crazy.
Yeah, it's malpractice, actually.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. All right. So you mentioned the book. You recently published a book. Is that your first?
It is my first. So that means there'll be more.
And it was an easy journey, right?
Oh, yeah, totally easy. It was like 12 years overnight. Absolutely.
And how did the launch go?
The launch was amazing. And it was one of those things that I had these big dreams and visions of what it would be. Like I wanted to have this huge party and, do this big talk at a big conference and launch it. And we did do that. So we launched it at Unbound last year, which is a major sales and marketing conference in the Boston area. And I was so lucky to have some of my clients actually fly in from across the country to sit on a panel with me that were included in the book and the stories and, talk about their experiences with it. Apollo, which I love their platform as far as that in the data that they have, they actually sponsored, they ordered books to give away to people at the conference and then sponsored this huge party at Trillium that, we were able to mingle with people and talk with people. And so, I felt like a big deal, but what it really was about was I just wanted to get the buzz out about the book. And within the first week, we had hit hot new release on Amazon, which doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but when you spent 12 years on something, that little kind of recognition does mean a little bit. And
congratulations.
Since there. And the thing that's funny about it is I wrote it for small business owners. I wrote it for the solopreneur, the founder who has to sell, because it made it so that it was easier for me to understand what to include in the book. And a lot of times I was afraid that means it's not going to be relative to these other companies and organizations. And what I have found is that by focusing on that one particular buyer or that one particular person and their problem, is it's made it relevant in other ways to so many other industries and so many other contexts that I wouldn't have imagined before. I just had a keynote and a workshop with the largest funeral services company in North America. Not a buyer that I would have ever thought that would have been in my audience, but that just kind of goes to show is that when you really focus on what matters to the people that you're trying to help, that it finds its way to the people who actually need it.
Well, what's interesting to me is I think we assume a degree of maturity in sales savvy based on the size of the company or the seniority of a position. But what I find is that Fortune, say 1,000 senior executives may not really understand where sales stand today. Mm-hmm. And board directors may not really understand where sales stand today. And so if we live kind of immersed in a world like you do with a lot of in an area of the country that's very SaaS centric and technology centric and a lot of best practices and innovation in sales and marketing are occurring there, we kind of assume that that's what people understand. I think that's an unfair assumption. I think your book does a really good job boiling it down in a way that's appropriate for people, regardless of the position or the size of their business.
Yeah, or how long they've been in sales. I've had people that have messaged me, and I'm thinking this is basic stuff. This isn't, earth-shattering, groundbreaking. At least in my mind, it wasn't because, the curse of knowledge, you think everybody knows what you know, like you said. But I've had people who've been in sales for 45, 50 years and have messaged me and said, you know what, I was starting to get down and out about the future of sales, but you just brought light for me into the whole sales industry again.
Oh, how neat.
Yeah. And then I've had other people say, I never understood why it worked this way. I kind of just learned it through experience and trial and error over the last couple of years. But now I understand why it works the way that it works. And now it's easier for me to teach it to my team or to replicate it in other areas. And that was really my whole mission behind all of this, is that we have so much knowledge out there based on some individual's experience in a limited capacity. And while there may be some truth to it, at the same time, we don't understand why it works the way that it works. And when we understand how something works and why it works that way, that allows us to adapt, to iterate, and to maybe even start to get ahead of some trends that might be coming down the pipe for us.
Right.
And that's why it was important for me to dig into the data and the research behind what works and what doesn't work, so that people can create their own experiments, their own ways of applying this thing. Because when you understand the mechanics of it, you can then adjust it to yourself.
Sure. So the title is Buyer First, Grow Your Business with Collaborative Selling. Did you write the title and then write the book, or did the title come out of the book process?
Half and half. So the first part of the title, Buyer First, was that I was set on that as being the first part of the title. But the subtitle, I didn't get to that until after I'd written the book.
Got it. Well, I'd say having read the book, number one, everyone needs to go out and get it. That's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, there's a really fundamental message that you weave throughout it and you repeat it explicitly on a number of times. And that's that in traditional sales, we do something to a buyer, what we want to do, our sales process. And you argue that in a buyer first world, sales is about something we need to do with a buyer.
Yeah.
Expand on that a little bit.
So much of sales, the last 100 years of sales has been focused on the tactics and the techniques and the things that we need to do to persuade and to influence, i.e. manipulate our buyers to do the things that we want them to do.
Are you saying the tactics aren't important?
Not that the tactics aren't important, but when we focus solely on the tactics and the outcome of the tactics, we ignore why or how that might work or not work. And we don't see the other person on the other side of the conversation. We only see what we are trying to do and what we are trying to accomplish and what we are trying to get out of them. And so by focusing solely on the tactics, one is we tend to try one tactic and then another. And it's like this, it's like being out in the ocean without, without a sailboat or a steer, and you're just being tossed about by what the latest wave and trend and fad might be, with no idea of why it might work or where it comes from, or if it even works. This is just, somebody's great idea. And so by focusing on the tactics, it's become a thing that we do to other people, right? Like we've all had that experience with the used car salesman and all of the tactics that they try, and we recognize them. Well, that's what's also happening in sales. We recognize that when they try to create urgency, we recognize when they use discounts to try to get us to do something that we want to do. And buyers are opting out of that. Like he would say from the Gartner studies, people are however percentage of the way through their buying process because they don't want to engage in these tactics anymore. And they have the ability to do their own research online. They don't need to engage in these tactics anymore. Now, one thing about that Gartner study is that when those people who went and did a purchase without actually interacting with the salesperson saw a 23% higher purchase regret than those that actually did talk with the salesperson. So even though buyers don't want to talk to salespeople and want to go through their journey, they still need salespeople to help them know that they're making the right decision.
Good salespeople. Good
salespeople, exactly. And buyers want to engage with those salespeople. And this is the other side of that, is that the research also shows that buyers value salespeople who actively listen to them and challenge the way they think about problems and solutions to give them new perspectives and ideas on that. You can't get that through your checklist of tactics. You just can't.
So if we talk about consultative sales, really what we're talking about is using the sales process as an opportunity to consult with a prospect to help them understand, define, quantify their problem, put it in the context of their business, explore the potential outcomes. That's really consultative sales, and that's about asking questions and listening, right?
Ideally. Except in practice, what happens in consultative sales, and I'm sure you've seen this, is that you go into a conversation, you find a pain point, and you start consulting to it. Right. And so what I often find happens in consultative selling, ideally that it is as you described, but in practice, what happens is that salespeople will go in, they hear the pain point that they can solve for, and now they've suddenly taken over the conversation. Here's how we're going to help you solve that problem. Here's why you should buy from us. Here's why we're different from every other solution out there. And so the consultative start is like this small.
Yeah, of course. You say, I've seen it, I've done it. I think most of us in sales have done it.
Yeah. And so collaborative selling is a little bit different in that it's not just about asking questions to get to a pain point to then consult on. It's actually asking collaborative, open-ended questions to understand how their buyer sees the problem, how the buyer sees the solution and the impact of that, what they think it should look like and work like, and really getting inside of their heads to understand and be able to empathize with them. And then using insights to offer points of, have you ever, it might sound something like a lot of the clients that we work with are also struggling with this because of X, Y, and Z, and then closing that with an open-ended question to understand how they see that, how they perceive that, and then using other frameworks that use buyer-focused language like you can, because that means, in order to facilitate and explain capabilities based on what the buyer has shared with you. And so collaborative selling it's different from consultative selling because it requires the equal involvement of the buyer and the seller together. And that is what buyers today want. They're asking for, they're demanding to be collaborated with, because they're doing all of this research. It's not
Right.
like they don't know anything about their problem or anything about the solutions that are out there. That's why we need to be more collaborative than consultative today, because of the way the buyers are changing their buying processes.
Right. So talking about the possibility of, I think the term that people used to use, maybe they still do, is disintermediating the salesperson by inbound marketing and availability of information online and buyer research and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question, does technology hamper or improve the buyer experience? Because often salespeople use technology to try to make themselves more efficient and just hammer prospects.
Mm-hmm.
But the technology, I believe, can be used to improve the buyer experience. I think chatbots are a really interesting example. They can be really crummy, or they can be really good. They can be really obstructive, or they can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Do you think technology is making it better or worse for the buyer experience?
It really depends on the intent of the person using the technology. In a lot of situations and cases, it's making it worse. Because, how many times have you tried to get a customer success person on the phone, and you've had to go through 15 different prompts and automated tellers and things like that? And you're like,
but you feel good because you know your call is really important to them.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, yeah, right, BS. But so in those kinds of instances, technology can create a disengaged experience for buyers.
Right.
But it with the intention of how you're going to use technology to enhance a buyer experience, it can be different. So, for example, in my speaking business, what we're looking at is how can we create and use technology to make it easier for people to work with us. So, we have a page set up for them. We have, specific links for them where they can get all of the media and it's all in one place. And so they don't have to sort through 15 different emails to get the information they need in order to get my bio or my headshot or the speaker agreement or the calendar link to book a call for all of these different things. That's one way that we can use technology to create a better experience by reducing or eliminating friction in the process. It also can be a great tool for us to use to understand our buyers. So, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about how we can use technology like LinkedIn and other sites in order to do research on our buyers before we actually reach out to them or talk with them. Because I'm sorry, salespeople, but there is absolutely no reason why you should be getting on a call and say, so tell me about you and your business. Right. You should already know.
So often in sales, I hear people draw an analogy to medicine. Yes. That it's important to be like a physician, to diagnose the problem before you offer a prescription. And technology certainly is an effective and an increasingly important tool in medicine to aid with that diagnosis. Yeah. On the other hand, you share in your book stories about doctors who are locked into some kind of a mindless flowchart and algorithm without actually thinking about the patient. Right. And I think when people tell salespeople to behave like a doctor, that may not be such a great analogy anymore. Do you agree?
I do agree, because the majority of us, when you've gone into a doctor's office, like I write about in the book where I had thyroid cancer. And so for 10 years, I was going from one doctor to the next, getting medical records from here to there, wasn't getting any clear answers as to why I still didn't feel good. And, all the doctors are like, well, everything looks normal here. And they stopped there. Like, whatever problems you're having are all in your head because all of this stuff looks normal. My checklist says you're fine. Right. My technology says that you're fine. And so there's no actual conversation that happens. And so
my sales process says that I've solved your problem and you need to buy.
You should buy now. You should just give me your credit card. There's no reason why you shouldn't, right? Or my checklist of questions has been completed and now I understand your problem completely. No, you don't.
Take that.
And so that analogy doesn't work as well as it maybe did before, except that there are pockets, and I was fortunate that I was able to find a doctor who took a more collaborative approach, who actually asked me questions saying, you know your body better than anyone else. What do you think is happening? And, used the technology and test, and then didn't just say, well, everything looks normal, but actually explained it to me so that I understood what it meant. So there are doctors out there that show these kinds of behaviors. Unfortunately, for the same reason that salespeople struggle to connect and have empathy and collaborate with their buyers, it's also the same reasons why doctors struggle with that, because you have all of these policies and procedures in place and insurance. And, like I have a doctor now who she said to me, I wouldn't be able to survive and pay my bills if I ran my business the way the corporations wanted me to. I wouldn't be able to spend more than 15 minutes with my patients, which doesn't allow me to really dig any deeper and understand anything. And so what she's done is she actually has like a concierge fee where I pay a fee for her every year. And that allows me to have extra time with her. It gives me the kind of time that I need to be able to understand what's going on.
Right.
And, that's kind of what I'm starting to see where the medical field is starting to go. It's starting to go into this, back in the day when we had doctors visit us at our homes with their little back bag. It's starting to go back to that, and it's being enabled by technology. But back to your point, like the analogy of that we need to have a doctor-like relationship with our buyers it's just as tough for doctors today as it is for sellers today for a lot of the same reasons. And so sometimes you have to take yourself out of the system that exists in order to start to change it. And so I look at it as you need to sell like a doctor, but a doctor who actually spends more time with their patients. That isn't about the 15 minutes that they have.
You just really raised a really good point. And that is that the system, I hate that term, but the system in which we exist creates many of the problems that we end up frustrated with. We just accept that we're supposed to do things in a certain way, and we end up making it difficult for ourselves.
Yeah, because we're trying to change this. The idea of trying to change the system from the inside is like, there's the brick wall. Go ahead and hit your head on it till you let me know when you're done.
All right. So talking about brick walls, let's talk about buying teams and committee decisions and change management. I mean, each of those is like banging your head against a brick wall in my experience. You cited in your book a Gartner study that finds that out of 1,000 B2B buyers, 80% voiced uncertainty in their own ability to manage change. So if realizing the value of a positive outcome of a buying decision requires change, and they're not sure that they can manage it, then what's the point in buying? This goes back to the jolt effect, I think. But what do you recommend?
So this is where salespeople can add the most value, because when you look at buying committees, take the typical enterprise sale where there's anywhere between 9 and 11 people that get involved in that.
The numbers I've seen are higher now. I think it's 12 to 15, but it's certainly at least 10, and most people are talking to 1 or 2. Yeah,
pre-pandemic, I think it was 5 to 6. It's doubled now.
Right.
As far as that goes, because everyone is so afraid of making the wrong decision, they get more people involved to validate whether or not they're going to make the wrong decision, so that it's no longer just solely on their shoulders if it goes wrong.
Right.
It's this whole risk and fear of change at play here. And so one of the things that there's a couple of things that salespeople can do and sales leaders can do in these kinds of situations. One is you need to train your salespeople on how to sell to each member of that buying committee, which means that they're going to have individual discovery calls almost, and then group discovery calls, because your goal as a salesperson is to help them to get to that point of consensus. Because if you can't get them to agree on what the problem is and what the impact of the problem is, you're never going to get them to agree on what the solution for it is.
And you got to know up front that of that buying team, a third of them are going to be pissed that they have to spend their time on that. They've got other things they don't think is relevant to their department. They think the money ought to go to another project that benefits their group. Some of them are just going to be obstreperous and obstructionist and passive aggressive. Yep. And some are really fiercely committed to trying to make it happen. And trying to manage across that, particularly when decision makers step back and give the responsibility for the decision to the committee so that they can kind of shirk that personal responsibility for potentially making a mistake. It makes it really hard.
It does. It's but the term herding cats, but herding cats who are high on catnip kind of a thing. And so for sellers, you really need to look at, how do I sell with each one of these individuals? And then take what I have learned in discovery with each individual and start to find the threads that connect them together, so that you can start to address the gaps that you're seeing, the different, like you said, everybody has a slightly different agenda. I'll get an example. I was working with a coaching client, a startup founder selling into the enterprise, huge enterprise, by the way. And she had the exact same thing happen where she's got, 5 or 6 different people on a call and it's just her. And so what I coached her to do is to reach out to each individual on that buying committee, set up a conversation with each one of them, get it, and go through the collaborative discovery questions that I talk about in the book. And what she was then able to do with that is to then, when she got everyone together, was able to pinpoint and point out all of the different perspectives and the overlap and the gaps and the inconsistencies and how her solution would help to solve those particular gaps and inconsistencies. Now it's moving forward into the next stage. Now, obviously this takes time. Obviously it takes diligence and patience, but the payoff is that you can actually start to see things move inside of an organization. And for her, especially as a startup founder, this is invaluable intel as to how she continues to shape her product for an enterprise solution.
Right.
And so really, when you're faced with having to deal with multiple buying committees, you have to look at how am I going to sell one-to-one to each? And then how am I going to then put all of these puzzle pieces together so that they can all see how it's interacting within their own organizations? Because a lot of times what's happening, even though they're in the same organization, heck, even in the same department sitting next to each other, it doesn't mean that they're having this conversation effectively.
So the fact that somebody's been in the same industry for 20 years, knows a lot of people, knows the technology well, what I'm hearing is their sales skills that made them effective at some point are not necessarily the sales skills that are going to make them effective at this point. They have to really up their game, regardless of how long they've been doing it. They have to be at least a second standard deviation sales talent, I would say. Yeah,
exactly. Because the only thing that's constant here is change. And if you've been in sales in the last 10 years, you've seen that happen.
Right.
And, the fundamentals of sales doesn't change. Active listening, asking really good questions. But we get so wrapped up in what the latest tactic and techniques are, we forget the fundamentals.
Right.
And if you've ever watched martial arts or, anything like that, they're focusing on the fundamentals, and that's what makes them masters at something.
Sure, the wax on, wax off routine.
Exactly. And it's funny because a lot of the coaching that I do is the wax on, wax off routine. And so if you're struggling with active listening in your sales conversations, I'm coaching people on how to do it in their personal conversations.
Right.
Because that's something that you can practice every day so that when you get into the sales conversation, it's wax on, wax off. It's muscle memory at that point.
You talked about some of the affirmations that you've gotten from your clients. I had a really interesting bit of feedback from one of mine, a sales manager that I've been spending some time helping, who told me that he actually found that his relationship with his wife had improved because of how he was listening now and reacting or not reacting. And I thought that was really neat to hear. And for somebody to have that kind of a victory, then certainly gives them energy to go and more vigorously apply these lessons learned.
Yeah. And that's why I encourage my clients to practice on people around them. And I've had my clients say the same thing. Michael Douglas, not the actor, the salesperson, has said to me many times, my relationship with my wife and my kids and my coworkers has completely been transformed because of the coaching that I did with you and how it carried over into my sales conversations.
That's neat.
And I'm always encouraging I've had clients that come back to me and said, I just got engaged to my longtime girlfriend. It never would have happened if I hadn't gotten coaching from you. Sales is really about good communication skills.
Right.
And that is something we can practice anywhere at any time on anyone around us. So if you really want to be a better salesperson, start learning how to actively listen and ask good open-ended questions of people and do it with everyone around you. I can't tell you how many Uber drivers' life stories I've heard.
Well, it's certainly a great role play exercise for sure.
It is. And it's muscle memory, right? And then the other thing of it is that as you start to do it more and more, you get more comfortable with it.
Right.
You get more confident with it. And you start to realize what I say over and over again is that it's not about you. It's really always, if you make your intention for it to be about the other person and be genuinely interested in them, the rejection, the uncertainty about what to do or say next starts to diminish because you're not making it about you or how you look or how you're perceived or how successful you are. It's about how do I understand this person and help them in the most consistent way possible.
Well, it goes back to your anecdote of those students at Harvard Business School, right, where before you started the exercise, they were relaxed and conversant and comfortable with each other and chit-chatting and extracting information from each other in a normal way. And as soon as you said, okay, flip the switch, now we're going to do it, then they became rigid and uncomfortable. It's a weird reaction that people have.
And I think it's because if you look up the definition of sales, it's an exchange of value. The difference between a sales conversation and a personal conversation is money. There's an exchange of value that's happening, and it's still an exchange. So it's a collaboration, but now suddenly money and the worth of something and the worth of our solution now comes into play. It changes this dynamic. Right. And so, when I'm using assessment tools, I don't use personality assessment tools because how you behave in a social situation is different how you'll behave in a sales situation. But if we can learn the skills in a social situation and get comfortable with them, then we can start to get more comfortable with them in a sales conversation.
Right. You use MVP, the acronym MVP, in an interesting way. You talk about most valuable problems that buyers have, most valuable products, or I assume services that we have that we can help them, and the most valuable process. Explain that process part.
So the process part is like we were talking about before. We design our sales processes from the inside out. This is the steps that we need to go through. And the process for the buyers, though, is not necessarily the same, but there can be an alignment with that. And so understanding what is the process that your buyers go through and how do they become aware of their problem? How do they go about starting to look at solutions for that? What are they searching for? Who do they turn to? Where do they find credible and trustworthy information? And so it's really the most valuable process is what is the process your buyers are going through? And then what are the steps that they go through when they start to seek out that particular solution? And then what's the process that they go through to bring that into their organization or into their company or for themselves? And so by understanding their process, then you can design your process to align or integrate in with that, which what makes things more predictable in a way. And buyers, like we talked about before, the buying process is not a step-by-step linear fashion. It's all over the place. And so being able to make a process out of it, I almost want to change process to puzzle because it acts more like a puzzle, right? Like you have the top box, you know what it's supposed to look like, but then you have a million pieces everywhere and you have to start to connect them together within that framework of what it's supposed to look like at the end.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the book is an important piece of your the sales excellence and sales thinking that you're sharing with the world. But there's a lot more to Carol than that. I know I mentioned you're up in Maine. You kind of like being out in the boonies. You're a big gardening fan. I mean, tell us a little bit more about you yourself. What makes you tick?
So I shared with you that I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. And so I have this thing. I love to see things grow. Like I love to see the potential in something that nobody else sees and then just kind of like watch it start to grow. So, my husband and I have a property services business on the side because we realized like one of the things that he and I always connect on is that we'll see some type of a property and we see the potential that it has and we'll flip it. Like we got it, we renovate it, like we're doing that to the home that we live in now. And so, for me, it's really about how, like seeing the potential in something and seeing it grow. So, some of my hobbies are renovating the house, gardening, like another thing that I love to see grow. Like I'm fascinated with how you can take a small little minuscule seed and it grows into this huge thing that then nourishes everyone. I've taken my entire house and like renovated it. It's not my family doesn't even recognize it anymore. Like they drive by it because it's not even the same place anymore. And that's kind of the thing that makes me tick is the potential for growth in others and not just growth for the sake of growth's sakes. I mean, that's what cancer is. We don't want that, but growth towards something that is meaningful to that particular individual or person's. Whether that's an experience or a state of something or a lifestyle that they want, like those are the things that really get me up in the morning.
And I'll date you a little bit, but that's okay because you already dated yourself. I know you say on your website you're a huge Pink Floyd fan. Where did that come from?
I mean, I grew up, I don't know where it came from, but I mean, I was an 80s child, so I still love the 80s music and things like that. But somehow or another, someone gave me a Pink Floyd song or something when I was really young, and I just became obsessed with Pink Floyd. Like I learned all of their music. My husband and I were laughing. We were driving home last night and the song Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd came on. I was obsessed with learning it on guitar. And so I learned the whole song on guitar and then realized that it was so difficult to learn because it's actually 3 guitars playing it. And I was trying to do all 3 parts on one guitar. And so it was just, I always loved Pink Floyd. I don't know what it is about the band, but it just was always something that spoke with me. I love the Grateful Dead. I love Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. My mother often says that I was born in the wrong generation because I was always raiding her closet for her 70s clothes. Right. And so she said, you just have an old soul and maybe that's what it is. But I've always had if you look at my Spotify playlist, you'll see that I have a very eclectic taste in music from, country and grunge rock and blues to opera and classical, video game music, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, even Eminem is on there. So it's a pretty wide and diverse range. I love music. Actually, in college, I had the decision I was either going to go to Berklee College of Music or I was going to go to a local community college for writing. Wow. And I ended up going for writing. But
what instrument were you going to go play?
Piano and guitar.
Interesting.
So I had this thing where I would take classical piano music and transpose it into guitar tablature so that I could play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on guitar.
Cool.
And then I would do the same thing with guitar music and translate it into piano. So I would because they're both string instruments. So it just worked. And I was in many rock bands throughout school. And
Still?
not as much still, although you will occasionally find me singing karaoke somewhere. And sometimes in my keynotes, I might sing a little riff of something here and there, but it's just a part of who I am.
Understand. One of the things that's clear listening to you talk and reading your book and knowing you is that I think kind of behind your efforts to help people improve in sales is a real depth of caring. You wanting to see people succeed. So let's talk about sales managers, because I believe that the most important and least understood role in industrial sales is the sales manager.
Yep.
What's your opinion of sales managers?
Sales managers are the change makers. They are the behavioral analysts, if you will. They're really the connection between the goals that the company has and the execution in the field. And you've probably heard the phrase, we've heard the phrase, how goes the manager, so goes the teams. Nobody quits a job, they quit a manager. And middle managers, sales managers are the most underappreciated, overworked, and underpaid individuals inside of a sales organization. But they are the most critical ones.
I agree.
Because sales managers are the ones that can enact a behavioral change in their team. They're the ones that they're the ones that kind of stand as the buffer from everything that rolls downhill from leadership and all of the pressures that happen. Good managers put a bubble around their team. They treat them as their family, as their children. Bad managers are the ones that just take whatever's going to be put on them as pressure and then hand it off to their team times 10.
Right.
And it's the good managers that will see the potential in someone, that will help them to dig into that will help them to understand what are the mindsets and beliefs that are getting in their way. They're not just coaching to the tactics, they're actually coaching to the inner potential of that individual. And that is the power that a sales manager has. Good managers make all of the difference. And managers who have been trained on how to coach and spend at least 50% of their time doing that have sales teams who have 49% more skills and abilities. Those are the ones that bust through quotas.
That coaching is such a great point. I know we both use OMG tools in our work with our clients. One of the first places I go when I do a sales team evaluation with a company is to look at the sales manager coaching, because in the kind of traditional industrial space where I work, what I almost always see is that the frequency is on an as-needed basis and the focus is on pricing and technical features, as opposed to every day or at least multiple times a week for frequency and a focus on tactics, techniques, strategy, opportunities, target accounts, territory management, team selling, prospecting, and all built around role playing. Exactly.
And then that is the single most important thing that a sales manager can do for an individual who's trying to learn or trying to break past a barrier is to role play something with them and and training your team on how to role play with each other. Because again, it comes down to that practice and that repetition. And with a manager who's been trained on how to coach and is not focused on themselves and is focused on their team, which is hard because most managers have been promoted as their top salesperson and they've always focused on themselves, just do what I do. Those are the managers who have teams that bust through quotas consistently, no matter what the market or what the buyer is. Those are the managers that their team will follow them and do whatever it is that they want them to do because they believe in their ability to help them to get there. And I mean, I've seen great managers leave a company and their entire team follows them because they want to continue to work with that manager. Those are the managers that matter.
For sure. Role playing is awkward for everybody. I don't think anybody likes role playing. It's kind of like cold calling. The first couple reps are uncomfortable every day, and then you get into a rhythm and you start doing it. Same with role playing. But it's amazing how many people let that discomfort get in the way. Oh, well, every conversation we have is different and unique. We can't role play because we don't know exactly what the buyer's going to say. Exactly.
That's why you role play.
Right.
Because you don't know what the buyer is going to say. And the thing is there has to be some parameters within the role play. It has to be realistic. It has to be not just a theoretical role play. When I do role plays with people, I want to do a role play based on a conversation you are about to have with a real person.
Recall planning.
it's not a theoretical, if they say this, then I'm going to say this. It's how does the conversation start off when you say it? What's the next question you're going to ask? And you actually go through. And here's the other thing with role play. Don't role play the entire conversation. Focus on small incremental changes that you can stack up over time, habit building with your team. So if you're a sales manager and you're trying to figure out, how do I start doing role plays with my team? It can be as simple as saying, so tell me what's happening with this opportunity right now. Who are you talking to? What's your next meeting with them? Well, how are you going to start off that meeting? What does that sound like? And now you can enter into a role play with them where you actually encourage them. All right, let's just play it out and see how this might actually flow. Because what I want to have happen is I want to have them hear the words come out of their mouth before they say them to their buyer.
So that's pre-call planning. But how about if we go back and listen to a recording of a similar meeting they had with another person and do a kind of a post-call debrief and build on lessons learned there? Do you do that as well?
I do that as well. And so it's a matter of finding that one point in the call.
Right.
Like ideally, you have a roadmap with as a manager, you have a roadmap with your coachee of what are the things that we need to work on and improve on, and which is why I love the OMG stuff, because it gives us that insight of what we need to work on in an objective way. And what then happens is that as you're listening to their role, they're reviewing their calls with them. What I have salespeople do is I want you to listen to your call first, and then I want you to come to our call with that one area where you think you did well and you want to keep doing that, but then one area where you feel like you could have done something different or something better. And let's practice that one part of the conversation until it becomes second nature. And we're going to move on to the next thing that you need to want to improve on. And so we're stacking that habit on top of another habit.
And what if you disagree about the thing they ought to be focused on?
That's when I start asking some open-ended questions to see if I can guide them towards what they might need to focus on.
Right. Makes sense.
For example, when most clients come to me, I need better closing skills, and they want to focus so much on the end of the deal, now I have to start asking questions about like how they got there, or why they missed getting to that particular decision maker, and how do they think that's going to improve the process, and is that something you think we should need to work on? And I'm their coach, and so they're typically going to go by what I say, but that's also what you need to do as a manager, is not say, I think you need to work on this. You need to get good at asking the questions that lead them to the conclusion that they understand that this is what they need to work on.
So this is very labor intensive. It requires a lot of caring and a lot of time. You talked about at least 50% of the time coaching salespeople. The military talks about span of control, how many people you can manage successfully and really deliver the attention and the mentorship that you need to in order to be successful. What would you say is the maximum span of control for a sales manager?
I think my ideal number is 8, and it can go up to 10. But what I often see is it's usually between 12 and 14, sometimes 16 people that are assigned to a sales manager. Ideally, the number is 8 because that's what allows a manager to not work 70 hours a week, still coach their team 50% of the time, and also then do all of the other functions that they need to do in recruiting and reporting and things like that. 8 is an ideal number because it gives them the ability to have multiple meetings a week with an individual, as well as team meetings and everything else, just within a 40 to 50 hour week.
I'd push back. I'd say I think the maximum number is 4 or 5, particularly if they have any of their own direct sales responsibility. There's a lot of research, again, going back to the military, that says that really 3 to 4 is the maximum effective number.
Yeah. And I would love to see it 3 to 4. I just don't know that we'll ever see anyone in sales have less than 8.
On the other hand, if we can get salespeople doing $10 million quotas instead of $1.5 million quotas, then it's a lot easier. There's enough money there to invest more in them and support them. And obviously it's a chicken and the egg sort of a problem. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's an important point, because if you're hiring the best fit salespeople for your organization, you don't need to put every seat has to be filled that you could possibly fill. And therefore, if you're hiring better salespeople and you're hiring better managers, you don't need to hire as many because they're capable of so much more. But instead, what I see happen is that there's a rush to fill the seats. And so they put not necessarily the best people in the best seats. And then they have to expend all of this time and energy to try to coach and train them, which they don't actually do. And then they wonder why, they have such a high turnover in their sales team.
And why, what is it? I think 40 to 60% of salespeople miss quota chronically.
Yeah. And that's only getting worse. And so what is their response? They raise the quotas.
Right.
Well, we need you to sell more, so we're going to raise the quota. Somehow that's going to work.
let's shift gears and talk about community. You're the chair of the Boston regional chapter of Emblaze, and I had never heard the Emblaze name before. I always heard AAISP, or the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals.
Yeah.
What's your connection to that group, and why do you think it's important? Why do you invest your time in it?
So I think it's important that, we have, one of the things that I like about Emblaze is that they are using research and data to inform best practices, which you don't always see a lot in communities. A lot of communities are about the expertise of the people in the communities, which is valuable, but it doesn't point to a scientific process that helps us to really, truly understand why things work the way they do or don't work the way they do. And so that's one of the reasons why I was so excited about when Emblaze came to be, which was actually an acquisition of AAISP by another organization. And what I look at it as is having our small local community in Boston is that we can take this higher level research and how do we now work together to figure out how we're going to apply this to our companies in our region. And so for me, it's an investment in my local community in the Boston area and the companies that are going to create the jobs there, is if I can help them to start to apply some of these things in their organizations, that they can grow better, that they can hire better, that they can train better, then that's going to help our community, our local job market to grow. And it's going to attract more companies to. And so for me, it's kind of this high level, how do I take what I'm doing at a small scale and how do I make it into a bigger scale with other organizations that they can start to be able to apply these things? Because even though we have the knowledge, we still need the people to help us to apply it. And so having a community of people where we can discuss these topics, where we can talk about what's working and what's not working in the context of our companies, and really being able to share and collaborate with each other. It's through the collaboration in our groups that we're actually able to start learning things. Our last meeting, we talked about account-based strategies and who that's good for and how to actually implement it. We had a whole panel of experts that was on there. We talked everything about, from intent data to sales and marketing integration, which we started talking about. And what's interesting is that there are companies that came into that particular talk who are trying to figure this out for themselves right now and brought their entire teams. And so, it's sometimes when you're inside the bottle of something, you can't read the label. And so by having other people to talk to about it, you start to gain your own perspectives on it. So at a company, organizational level, it's what I align with and being able to make change happen.
Now, and Blaze talks about what they call digital first sales.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I mean, it's basically this world that we find ourselves in. We're on Zoom conversations. We're using technology to communicate. We're no longer hopping on a plane to sit in a conference room to be able to discuss these things with people. We're doing it through digital means, which means we need to find ways to connect in a human level through these digital means. And
it's not just for sales of digital products. Then digital first might well apply to industrial companies, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, it definitely applies to industrial companies. We have a lot of actually industrial companies within that organization, but it also applies to customer success or support and sales and marketing. Mm-hmm. And so we're living in a digital world right now. I mean, there's no way that you can avoid it. And it's not to say that in-person and traditional means are going to completely disappear, but we primarily engage digitally first with people these days.
Right. I know another area of significant focus and passion for you is this topic of women in sales.
Yeah.
Talk about that some.
Well, it's funny because Lori Richardson is a dear friend of mine, and she has a mission to see more women in sales and tech leadership. And I'm on a mission to change the perception of sales, because that was why I didn't get into sales, is because of my negative perception, which most of us have. And so the correlation, like our missions somewhat overlap, because I believe that when we change the perception of sales, we'll attract more women into sales. And I think that we need more women in sales because of the nature of sales today. And Lori's on a mission to do the same thing, but she wants to attract more women to sales. And my thing is, if we change the perception of sales, we'll attract more women to sales. And so it's kind of this, I don't know if you want to call it a catch-22, which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But I look at having more women in sales as a way for us to start to raise the level of sales today. Because for the most part, most women didn't get into sales because, I didn't get into sales when I was young because I didn't want to live on a commission, because I had 2 young kids. I was a single mom with a mortgage, and I couldn't really see myself taking that risk. Also, I hated
So you
sales.
started your own business instead.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That was a much better, safer bet. And I just learned how to sell anyway.
Right.
But I think that having more women in sales is going to change the perception of sales because we are more inclined to listen. We are more inclined to have empathy for our buyers. And it's not saying that men can't, it's just something that is more natural to a lot of women. And I think that also by doing that, we're going to change the perception of sales the more women that we get into sales. And the opportunity, I mean, you talk about the pay gap. I mean, there still is a pay gap for women in sales. They still make less than a lot of their male counterparts, even though they perform better. But the pay gap is not as great in sales as it is in some other parts of the industries.
But hasn't the SaaS and tech world made a lot of headway on women in sales? I mean, I think of Joe Rowley, for instance. She's an icon in sales.
Yeah. I mean, they've made definite progress, but it's still pretty rare to see a sales team. I mean, to see a sales team to have 50% men, 50% women is not as common as people might think. But when you start moving up the chain into sales leadership, those numbers get even smaller.
I see.
And the thing is that in order for you to go into sales, you need to see, I mean, we all need to see people like us in the organization, but not only that, people in leadership in our organizations. If I'm a woman going into a sales organization and I'm the only woman and all of my bosses are white men, then it doesn't seem like that's something that's attainable to me. I don't see other people like me doing that. And so it's something that wouldn't even necessarily enter into my realm of possibilities. Well, maybe I would, but not everybody would. And so I think that's the other reason why it's important for us to have more women in sales. The other thing is this. This is the biggest reason. Our buyers demand it. Buyers are looking for diversity and innovation in the conversations that they're having. And if we have, forgive me for this, if we have the same white men, we're not going to have the same diversity of thought and innovation that we normally would. When we have women and men and different races and colors, you get different perspectives. And that is what buyers want in organizations, is they want to be able to see themselves in that. And there's actually been some research and data that ties this to the bottom line. But the other part of it is buyers who are demanding today to get different perspectives on things, that's not going to come if we don't have diversity within our own organizations.
So we won't dive into all of this stuff, but I mean, I think the bottom line is what buyers want. You spoke earlier. They want somebody that's going to listen, help them understand their business challenge, help them understand how to achieve the outcomes that are important to them. And that means somebody with business acumen, business savvy, the ability to listen, the ability to reason, high levels of creative thinking. And so really those sorts of intellectual and personality skills become really important.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, women have a lot of buying power today. So they want to see themselves in that kind of realm of things. So I think that, you know, the other part of it is that where everyone is struggling to find sales talent, but they don't realize that they're alienating 50% of the population by the way that they actually hire that sales talent. And some of the best sales talent, because there's a lot of data that shows that women actually sell at a higher and better rate than a lot of men do. But we're still the minority. It's still paid less.
All right. Shifting gears again. Your company's called Unbound Growth. Where did that name come from?
Well, there's inbound, there's outbound, there's even all bound, but I called it Unbound. And near bound, yeah. See, there's all of these bounds. I called it Unbound Growth for a couple of reasons. One is because the whole point of it's not about us, it's about our buyers. And our buyers are the ones who decide what bound it is that they're going to be. And whether it's inbound or outbound, they don't use any one of these channels. They use all of these channels. So that was one reason, is that it's all about the buyer, and the buyer is not beholden to whatever process or methodology that you want to follow, right? So we need to take that off of the table. It's whatever it takes to get in front of our buyers. That's what we're going to do. The other part of it is
ethically.
Called it ethically. Yes. Always ethically, always for good, never for evil. And the other part of the reason that I called it Unbound Growth is because it's really focused on the personal development of individuals. And again, back to, I love to see the potential for growth, and human potential is limitless. It is unbound. And the other part of this is that when you become unbound from something, it opens up the possibility for so many other things. When we get bound to one particular thing or one particular way of doing things, it limits us. And so Unbound Growth is both about the limitless potential of individuals to grow. It's also about our buyers' tendency to not follow our own processes. They're going to do what they're going to do. And so we need to not be bound to the way we do things.
Right.
But then if you look at the symbol of the company, it's actually a Celtic Triskelion symbol. that actually needs progressive growth. And so that was the reason why I chose Unbound Growth, because it is all about the progressive growth of individuals in the service of others.
Cool. And so within your company, your revenue model is you speak, you've got book revenue, you coach individuals, you train teams. Are those the legs of your stool?
Those are the legs of the stool. And so, the speaking part is to really get the message to people, to inspire a change and a belief in the potential of something. The one-to-one coaching is really about the potential within that individual. And then the team coaching, like I do training on how to hire salespeople, because that's the first step. But then I also do training on how to coach your salespeople. And so that you can start to implement these things within your own organizations, as well as training on the sales and buying process itself. And the book is a recurring revenue stream that it's really just about, I told my husband, this is my insurance policy. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody else can learn from my mistakes. Like, I never expected to make money off it. I still don't expect to make money off of it. It was more of I want to have this in the world so that other people can learn from it. And it's led to a lot of these other things.
So you're helping a lot of people learn from you, but you learn yourself. So YouTube channels, podcasts, blogs, what do you recommend? Where do you suggest that people, particularly in the industrial space, go to learn about sales?
I think podcasts are great if you can find the right one that will actually give you some insights and perspectives on things.
So recommend a couple.
One of the ones that I love, some of the ones that I love are actually Alice Hyman has a great podcast that is for CEOs about sales, because a lot of CEOs aren't really paying a lot of attention to how their sales organizations are run. So that's one that I like to listen to a lot. The other one that I love listening to is Mike Weinberg's podcast, and not just because he had me on there, but he actually speaks directly to sales management and the impacts and a lot of the things that we talk about. I also love Jeb Blunt's podcast because it's quick little snippets of things that allows, salespeople to pick up some quick tips on different types of things. The other thing is, with all the three of those podcasts, their mindsets and intention towards sales align with mine. And so that's probably one of the reasons why I like listening to it. But then I also listen and read a lot of books. I probably read over 100 books a year, and that's just the ones that Kindle tracks for me, not to mention the physical ones that I read or the ones that I listen to. And so I'm often listening to a book, and not just sales books. Like, I'm listening to books about behavior change. I'm listening to books about decision making. One of my favorite books was The Code of Trust by Robin Dreeke. Was not a sales book, but a book about building trust. Another book that I'm listening to right now is The Psychology of Money, because how we think about money is going to impact how we talk about money with our buyers and understanding how they think about money. And so I would encourage people don't just listen to sales experts. Listen to other people who have expertise in the area that apply to sales: building trust, active listening, personal development, grit, resilience, self-care. Like, the importance of managing your own stress and emotions comes down to really good self-care, which is what's going to allow you to change and address those beliefs and those mindsets and adopt new habits in sales. So if you really want to up your sales game, you need to broaden your horizons of where you get your knowledge from.
So 200 books, did you say 100 books a year?
100 books a year.
100 books a year, so 2 a week. What's your daily workflow? How do you find time to read that much in addition to everything else that you've got going on?
So I typically start my morning with yoga, meditation. Now I don't drink coffee anymore, so it's some type of green tea that I'll drink in the morning. And it's typically after that I'll do my first reading. And so in the morning, I do what I call my work reading. So that's, things that are related to work and things like that are, specific things that I'm reading there, like The Psychology of Money. Actually, the book that I'm reading right now is, I forget the name of it because I just started it, but it's about how to use data and science and narratives to tell stories. It's an older book. And so that's how my morning starts. And then at lunchtime, I'm typically also reading while I'm eating my lunch. Again, whether that's a book that I'm reading for a client or something along those lines. I don't watch a lot of TV. I read instead of watch TV. And even while my husband's watching TV, I'm typically reading.
Right.
So I'll read after I read in the morning. I read at lunchtime. I will read at the end of my day, like after dinner, while, Steve's doing the dishes. I'll be reading a book or something like that. And then I'm typically reading before I go to bed. Although before I go to bed, I don't read business stuff because my brain starts to go. I'll read nonfiction books. I'm sorry,
Got it.
fiction books, because it's mindless reading for me, kind of helps me get out of that state, and it typically puts me to sleep. I love reading historical fiction. It's like probably my favorite genre.
Yeah, I agree. Historical fiction is great. And I find I do the same thing in the evening. That's what I read to just kind of entertain myself and help shut down my mind.
Yeah.
You talk
I
pretty
travel a lot too, so I'm always reading when I travel. Like,
right.
I mean, I think I traveled in the last 2 weeks. I've probably traveled 24 hours and read at least 3 or 4 books in the 24
Wow.
hours on the plane.
You talk pretty quick. When you listen to a podcast, what speed do you listen at?
I listen to it at about 1.5 to 1 3/4, which is also the speed that I listen to when I'm redoing people's calls.
Got it. Biggest concern as you look at business over the next, say, 3 years, what worries you the most? And obviously somehow related to sales, but not specifically about sales.
The thing that worries me the most, is climate change. And I don't think anyone is really taking into account the impact it's going to have on business travel, supply chains. Even just, if we're going back into the office and how we go back into the office, I think it's the underlining thing that's going to cause so much disruption in the next 5 years that people are not anticipating in ways that I don't think that we can actually even forecast yet, because nobody really knows how it's going to, we're still kind of like guessing as to how it's going to impact us. Like, we've had the mildest winter that we've ever had in recorded history, and it's not going to get any easier. I think the impacts that it's going to have on business and infrastructure is going to be deep and far reaching. And we don't even quite have a handle on what that's going to be yet, or a solution for it.
Got it.
I mean, think about like power outages. One of the things that I'm seeing happen a lot, especially in the South, is that they're having these brownouts and power outages and internet shortages. And if we're going to be doing everything digitally in business, that's going to have a pretty big impact.
Sure. Absolutely. All right. Everyone needs to head to their bookstore, buy a copy of Buyer First, Grow Your Business with Collaborative Selling. And then once you cross that off your list, if they want to get in touch with you, Carol, how do they find you? How do they reach you? How do they connect with you?
So you can go to my website, which is carolmahoney.com. And by the way, if you do purchase the book this year, we're doing a monthly sort of group open office hours, group coaching session for everyone who purchases the book. So once you do that, go to carolmahoney.com in the books page. You'll see at the bottom of that order page that there's a form to fill out that you can sign up for our monthly, 1 hour kind of group check-in. Bring your situation, your questions. You get me for an hour for free. But then you can also find me on LinkedIn, which is where I spend most of my social media time. If I'm not reading, I'm on LinkedIn.
Got it. And LinkedIn, your profile is what?
It's Carole Mahoney. There's only 2 other real Carole Mahonies out there. So if you search for me, you should be able to find me pretty easily.
Good. All right. So as we wrap up, Carol, we've had a long conversation, a really wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah.
We dove into details. We zoomed out to high-level theory. Put it all into perspective for us with some final advice.
My final advice is that when you think about sales, we're all told it's a numbers game. And it is a numbers game, but it is more of a mental game than it is a numbers game, because when you master your mental game, the numbers will come. And that selling isn't something that we do to other people. It's something that we do with them. And when we take those things and you put them together, that's where you're going to see your ultimate success come from. And not only that, but you're going to feel good about the success that you've gotten because it has truly helped other people.
Got it. A great way to wrap up. Wonderful conversation, Carol. Thank you for your time. Thanks for joining me. I hope people find a lot of value in this. And I hope that everyone buys the book and reaches out and connects with you on LinkedIn and learns more that you have to teach.
Thank you so much for having me. I know it was a long conversation, but it feels like it flew by.
Perfect.